So welcome to this session on creating and presenting the Paracoach learning course. I'm Amy Hardwick, I'm the project officer on the Paracoach project and also a student here at John Moores. And this is...
I'm Kevin Meader, I'm director at the Immersive Learning Studio, and we're the company who collaboratively designed and developed the e-learning course and platform.
So just a brief overview of what we're going to cover today in the session. So I'm going to do a short introduction about coach education and what the literature says about that for parasport, disability sport. Kevin is then going to talk to us about e-learning, and then we're going to talk about the Paracoach course in particular. I'm going to tell you what we are covering in that course, so what the topics are, and then we are going to do a brief overview of that course as well. And we've got a few activities for you. So when we give you an activity, you've got some paper on your desks. We've got 4 activities, they match up with the 4 boxes. If you're in a larger group, if you can start your discussions in pairs, and then if you break out into your whole table discussion, that would be great. And then we're going to ask for feedback on each activity from the different tables. So, activity 1, to start us off. Kevin, we'll have that over to you.
Yeah, we'd like to throw you in at the deep end before we give you any of our information. And it's there on the board. In your experience, how effective do you believe e-learning to be? What's your historic experience of it? Was it good, bad, indifferent? Are you an advocate, or do you prefer a classroom environment, or do you espouse the benefits of the blended learning approach? And just let us know some of the benefits or challenges of your own experiences. I hope that's simple enough.
So we'll have a little wander around the room, so if you want to start your discussions, write some notes down on the paper. Okay, I'm going to just stop you there, folks. One of you is in the little conversations. We're going to start and ask you for some feedback. I'm going to start on this group at the front here that I've just spoken to.
So we kind of spoke about that. Well, the keyword was "it depends," which I'm sure is similar for people. We spoke about that it can be both more accessible for people, but also more inaccessible. So accessibility-wise, for example, if you've got a pre-recorded lecture, there might be certain times of the day that you feel good or and things. So you know, if you can engage, if you feel particularly good in the morning, and rather than a 5 o'clock lecture, you can look at it the next day and you can take more in. Similarly, there's no travel time, and you know, let's say that you can engage if you feel particularly fatigued in your bed at some point, like Max is telling me that. But then it can also be inaccessible. Like if you don't have Wi-Fi, you might have a shared laptop. You know, there might be various like location or socioeconomic issues that mean online learning is not as possible or as inclusive. So we kind of spoke about that, and then I'll pass on to someone else. So, yeah,
Thank you. Next table. Any feedback?
Yeah, similar. So sort of obviously accessibility. The website is accessible, then it might be more accessible to some people. We also talked sort of it needs effective support system. So to still have the opportunity to ask questions to like a real person and get that answer. Otherwise, you can just get a textbook, read that, and sort of be done with it. And we had a point that it's easier to keep up to date, so that might be a benefit. So that sort of new research, for example, or new findings can be sort of implemented as they come out.
We also said that sometimes you don't always learn as much, unless you're actually doing it, actually doing the activity.
Yeah.
Sometimes you can you can do these online courses, but then if you get to the end, you've got all the questions wrong, you've got to start again.
Yeah.
So at least if you're doing it, there and then you've got, okay, yeah, I've answered all these questions now, I've got A, B, C, let's go on to the next level, let's go to level 2 or go to level 3.
Yeah. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, I think it definitely depends on the context. I think if we're looking specifically at coaching, we've talked about the new FA Level 1 that has gone completely online, and that you can qualify to be a football coach without actually kicking a ball. I think that does have its challenges, but then again, like the first table said, you can do it in your own time, and you can kind of go along at your own pace, whereas if you're in a classroom setting, maybe not understanding, they can kind of go 2 steps ahead. So again, I think it just depends on the context of what you are learning as to the outcome of successful.
Yeah, thank you. Let's see if
I'll go on then. Yeah, I think it usually depends with them. I think the consensus obviously quite like the idea of e-learning because it's more open to that. But it depends what type of learner you are. So I'm very much a visual learner, so I need to see things. we agreed that it's having the access to somebody that we can talk to. And a lot of learning is done through other people. So when we deliver courses and have people be able to talk about their experiences and learn from those experiences, to the point that it's easy to skim through the stuff that you need to do and go, right, from that, what is it actually going in? Because at the end of the day, you're working with people.
Yeah.
Thank you. And I'll say what about.
So, yeah, it depends. Hybrid systems, I think, are going to be very helpful moving forwards because there are significant benefits and some disadvantages, and it depends who you are, what you're teaching, etc. So I'm really pro hybrid approaches generally, and I'm running an in-person workshop in December, and I'm planning to have access for some people through Zoom to that same workshop to do that. But the benefits we discussed, that it can be done in your sleep in terms of education. The educator, once you've run the workshop once or the presentation once, that's it. Boom, you can go to sleep and you can keep teaching people whilst you're not actively involved, which is very helpful in terms of in some aspects. You can reach way more people. Like we turned a bunch of in-person workshops to online workshops, and we had people from other countries logging in, and way more, like the best kind of reach that we'd ever had because people didn't have to drive to or fly to England, etc. Can be done on a person's own schedule, trackable and updatable. And then problematically, not everyone is techie or like computer literate. For disabled people specifically, the likelihood of there being poverty in the family is significantly higher. So if you're trying to reach and teach disabled people, they may not have access to a computer, which is a huge issue for online learning. You lose empathy with your students. Like you can't connect and understand that they've just all fallen asleep whilst your lecture's going on, or there's no connection, or fear from the student of being told off for not paying attention. Like you can wander off, come back, and the computer's ticked over, and you can just kind of guess the multiple choice questions at the end and hope for the best. And also the incidental kind of communication between people in a learning environment has gone. It's like it's not just about the course material, it's about the things you learn from each other, the things you get clarity on, and things like that. So
yeah, the other bit I thought, you can't add chaos into your learning unless it's a hybrid approach. you want to be able to add chaos in. So for example, you're delivering a session here, but you might find, based on some of the feedback we give you, you want to rip up half the stuff you're going to present, and you want to divert. And you can't do that most often if it's strictly an e-learning based module. If it's a hybrid type approach where actually you've got someone who's interacting with you and can build off the networking element of it, you can add that in. I think that's the bit that we need to try and harness, rather than just, you've got to learn this. My big fear with the FA module is that you're basically qualified, but you've never spoken to them.
Yeah.
And coaching is about people.
Though
So you can have a qualification.
I want to challenge, sorry, on that reminded me, I just want to challenge, you can definitely teach football without kicking a ball, but you can't necessarily coach without talking to someone.
So if you've never kicked the ball, how are you going to do those demonstrations to your participants?
You don't need to demonstrate, you can ask your participant to demonstrate. If monkey see, monkey do, and you're not necessarily the best player.
And they still don't know how to play the sport, so you've got to teach them how to play that sport in the first place.
Well, to give a much better, wider example, I teach tumbling to 5-year-olds. I teach them how to do standing back tucks, back handsprings, cartwheels, and I'm definitely not doing tumbling anymore. So it's easily possible with an adaptive learning style to teach anything you like without doing it yourself. And it's better to show, for instance, I'll use Susie to show Dave how to do a back handspring, because I know Susie's got a really good back handspring. As their coach, I'm not necessarily the best person to do the demonstration. And then if Susie does something wrong, I can go, okay, these are the things she did right, these are the things she did wrong. If I've done the back handspring, I can't say, okay, these are the bits that I sucked at, because I wasn't watching. So just to challenge that concept.
Okay, we'll pick that one up for further discussion.
And the last table.
think everything's been said.
I don't think anyone said it depends.
discussions really, and not.
Yeah, I think probably we came up with a mixture of what everybody kind of said about it's really good to have that blend. You're probably catering for more people if you're doing a mix and match, like a pick and mix of different things, because one size does not fit all, whereas you've got options where maybe something doesn't work for somebody, but then they will find other tasks that might work. But definitely the case of you should always have contact with your students, at least every student once a week if you're in lecture. So I think probably the same sort of thing, you should always have some form of contact, whether it's not necessarily discussing in a live webinar or Zoom, but even having those open chat forums or where they upload discussions, things like that. You know, with social creatures, there should be some social element to it as well.
Thank you very much. So Kevin is going to touch on all that after I've given you a brief introduction, just about coach education. So basically just what the literature says. So there's a lack of disability-specific coach education. So this is courses on their own, but then also able-bodied courses tend not to also acknowledge para and disability sport in their education. So this obviously leaves coaches to learn through different methods. So they're often learning and developing their knowledge informally. They're developing their practice through trial and error and seeking learning opportunities through maybe able-bodied education. Now, obviously, then they try and implement these principles into para sport, into disability sport, and this can be decontextualised because there are similarities, obviously, between the contexts, but there are also differences that we need to be aware of. And a lack of educated coaches is actually a barrier to participation for disabled people. So it's really important that we have effective coach education so these coaches can provide effective and quality sporting experiences for the participants. Hence the need for effective coach education. So the transformation of coach education to support coaches in developing para sport is vital, and so we hope that this e-learning course can bridge that gap for some coaches who maybe are lacking in certain experiences and certain opportunities to learn and develop their practice. So I'm going to hand over to Kevin, who will delve now a bit more in depth into e-learning.
Okay, I'm going to go right off script here now, because there's a sequence of the usual PowerPoint explaining who I am, what we do, etc. But I really like the feedback from the first question about your experiences of e-learning. And I suppose what I'm looking to demonstrate is there's a world of difference between good e-learning and great e-learning. All the positives that people mentioned about the ability to reach a wider audience and at their convenience, etc., are all good, valid points. But as somebody who makes a living from the design and development, or rather employing a team who are responsible for the design and development of e-learning, virtual reality, etc., you're never going to compete with face-to-face physical environment training and learning. And anyone who tells you otherwise is trying to sell you an e-learning program. It's a simple fact. Now, that's not to say there aren't huge benefits for adopting a hybrid learning model, or even e-learning in isolation. If it's done well and it's accommodating all different learning styles, then you can deliver. It's not just about the far reach. It's not about the numbers. It's not about the convenience. It's about delivering the right outcome. So somebody in the previous meeting said it's a cost saver. You can reach thousands of people, whereas a classroom environment you're going to reach 40 people. If your objective is to cost save, it will be the most expensive saving you've got. It's all about the outcome. You've got to make sure whatever it is that you're delivering in the learning and training does what you want it to do. The FIFA coach that you mentioned and the point you made. I'm going to try and remember everybody's points, but I just want to address one single point, going off on a tangent, but there's a point to it. Back in 1980, 81, I was travelling through the south of France, and a friend of mine was teaching windsurfing for his daily earnings. And I wasn't doing anything, I wasn't working there, I just travelled over. And I watched them train people windsurfing. I'd never done it myself before, and he went off for lunch one day and said, just mind the storm for me. And somebody came along and said, can I have a lesson? And I said, yes, you can. Because I remembered verbatim all of the things that my friend who was the instructor was doing about, it has to be at 90 degrees and you take So I knew the script. So I gave a windsurfing lesson in the hour that he was away. So it's to support. It is possible. I'm not saying it's the right thing to do every time, but it is possible to deliver training without actually being skilled at it. But I think your point, you need the interaction. So interaction is important. But back to e-learning. The points everybody made that they like the fact that it reaches more people. Again, it's great, but it has to deliver the outcome. It's not a cost saving. It has to accommodate all styles. Somebody made the point about working in isolation and the instructor doesn't know whether you're paying attention. Trust me, the same things happen in a classroom environment. People snooze off. People pretend to be paying attention, but they're not really. Actually, e-learning gives you a better metric. And I like to use real-world examples. So to jog my memory, I want to go back on script. And if anybody remembers the point they raised and can raise their hand and remind me of it, I'll come back and address it. Who are we? The Immersive Learning Studio. We're based in Liverpool City Centre in Harman Street, in the Harman Yard, courtyard, by the Buyers Club. We are Liverpool based, but our client base is throughout the UK, throughout Europe and North America. And what we do is bespoke e-learning, augmented and virtual reality, which is come on leaps and bounds, simulation and role play and gamification. The three things there are all elements of the bespoke e-learning. The beauty of this course that we're giving you an overview now is that it's built in a modular way, so that if the opportunity presents itself to introduce virtual reality elements to it and augmented reality, it can be added onto it. Likewise, simulation and role play and gamification is just to engage the people who are using it. Great e-learning doesn't just deliver information and then asks questions and then monitors how many questions they remembered. You have to ensure that they know the information, but they understand it. The questions, it's all about the instructional design of the content. So the questions have to be structured in a way that makes the user think, not just remember. The other task it has to do, it has to enthuse them and motivate them. So on this particular one, it's an overarching para-coach course, and it's introductory, but it provides, if you like, a unifying, because there is no real unifying content that exists, I believe. There's lots of individual pockets, but this is quite an overarching academic study. So that's what we do, and we work collaboratively with Amy and Dr. Tabitha Huntley in the design and development of this. Who we do it for, again, this is just me showing off. But it does give you some indication of the integrity of the people responsible for the design and development. Somebody mentioned, and I can't remember who it was, about you can't tell if somebody's not doing their work if it's online or you know, are they cheating? And somebody asked a similar question in the previous course, and I like to use real-world examples because they're easy for me to remember, because they actually happened. So I want to refer to the top right there, Sharing in Growth. That's a government-sponsored programme in combination with Rolls-Royce. And this was a programme to ensure that the British aerospace industry remains competitive on a global level. And anybody who's involved in any manufacturing of anything to do with aerospace, aeroplanes, engineering, etc., would benefit from training in lean production, in accountancy, in sales development, in business development, etc. And we were tasked to get all of the information and make it digital and accessible online. So once they delivered the classroom training, and the people would go back to work full of enthusiasm, but they'd be met with people who weren't on the course and maybe the enthusiasm would dwindle away. So we developed the resource. Now, the point of this story is several of the organisations sang the praises of the project and saying, you know, we've won a multi-billion-pound contract, you know, on the back of the things we learned on this course, which is great, round of applause for everybody. Some of them, though, who didn't have the same level of success will point the finger at the organisation saying, this isn't very good, it was a waste of money, it's another one of government quango who's thrown money at something but there's no real substance to it. Our analysis on the e-learning provides us with information is the successful companies they'd have their 20 individuals on the programme. They would all go through the course intelligently, thoroughly, and score high 90% on the feedback. So we also knew that people who scored high 90% on some modules, they were all scoring 30%. So we realised it wasn't that they weren't understanding, it's just that our content wasn't good enough. So great e-learning is a process of continuous improvement. You don't just deliver it, as somebody mentioned, I can't remember, you don't just design the course and think, right, that's it now, it's done. And you have to analyse the results. So we picked up on this 30% low score is a module that needs improvement, and we rethought how it was done, how it was delivered, and we noticed the marks come up. But the important thing was the companies who weren't achieving success, of their 20 individuals who went on the programme, they'd have maybe one or two who visited the e-learning follow-up and maybe do an hour or so on it and then never bothered. It's only when we highlighted this to them, there's the success, that they did start to engage and do something. They were in the position of being able to blame somebody else. Anyway, that was just me bragging, giving some information. Back to Amy with the context.
Yeah, so just to give you a little bit of background information about the context and how we've got to where we are now. So we conducted a workforce audit with coaches working in para disability sport across the world, basically. So we had 313 coaches from 26 different countries and 54 different sports. They worked across different contexts, so we had some at community level, some at elite level, some in between. And then the participants, which were coaches themselves, also had a range of athletic experience themselves. So some of them competed at the top level, some of them sort of just for recreation, just for enjoyment. So one of the questions that we asked them on the survey was what gaps do they think they have in their own knowledge of coaches, and what would they like to look at and to learn more about being able to coach their athletes more effectively. So the first one that came up, and probably one of the more popular ones, was impairment. So they wanted to know specifically about different impairments and impairment effects and how it would affect athletes' function and how it would affect them in practice. Also importantly, how the coaches can adapt their practice to then suit individual athletes as well. And another one that came up was sport and event specific requirements. Then we had practice planning and delivery, so different coaching styles you can use to deliver sessions, how you plan sessions and using your time to deliver those sessions as well. We had sports science, which covers sort of physiology, biomechanics, nutrition, and then sports psychology is also under that umbrella, but that came up individually as a term as well quite a lot. So generally, the key findings were that there was a lack of opportunities for coaches to learn through para-specific coach education. And when I use that phrase, that is courses that are individually for para-specific, and also able-bodied courses that have an element of that in. So there was a general lack of opportunity for coaches with this, and 81% of the 313 coaches that took part in the workforce audit actually said that they had no experience with para-specific coach education, which is quite obviously a large percentage. But there was an overall desire from them to learn and develop as coaches, so in the boxes where they had to write about what gaps in knowledge they had and what they wanted to develop more, it was quite clear that all of the coaches were really keen to develop their practice and to build on their knowledge so they can provide their athletes with a more valuable sporting experience. Back to Gavin.
Yeah, I don't know who we are, what we do, and the where and when. And I think I've covered this, and I think everybody all viewed this as a positive. Is that it's accessible, the content is accessible at the time that's convenient to the participants at the place and the location. Somebody did mention a relevant point about the economic potential restrictions if somebody hasn't got, the necessary mobile device or internet connectivity. And I guess the same logic can be applied to the classroom environment. Somebody may not have the ability to go. So it's not where we are, it's where we're headed, and I think more and more people do have access to, and there are programs, but I guess e-learning is not going to resolve any issues if you don't have access, but generally you're going to reach a hell of a lot more people who may be economically disadvantaged via e-learning than you are if somebody has to go and travel to a specific location. The one thing that's missing off this image is something I brought up in what we do is we'd ordinarily have a Oculus headset in there So the e-learning can be built in a modular way, and virtual reality, which is a really immersive way. I don't know if any of you have experienced the Oculus and 3D modelled environments, but it really leaves an imprint. You know, the greatest lecturer and teacher in the world can deliver a really engaging message, but if you put somebody in that environment, so that's probably one for the future. I mentioned before, you all give feedback on your historic experience. Somebody on will remain nameless was explaining how on previous e-learning courses they could just multiple taps through until they got the right answer. That's one way of doing it, but if you create the course so that it's in an engaging way, and the metrics will let us know who's either tapped lots of times or who has actually thoroughly read the course. You don't necessarily have to go all the way back to the beginning. This is all down to the permissions controls that the body, the paracoach set up. So we've done one recently for the Special Olympics, and they wanted, it was initially set up where if they didn't get the required pass mark, they would have to go back and do the course again, and they said, no, we don't want that because it'd be too time consuming. We want to steer them in the right direction of the right answer, so a clue is given when they go. So all of that is down to the structure and the design. But good effective e-learning, you don't necessarily have to go. Someone's had a poor experience, but it doesn't have to be that way as well. So that's the where and when. Why? I think these images explain it. It's not about loading up content and reaching more people because it's more cost effective. It's about getting the outcome. So the 81% of current coaches out there who haven't had any real sort of unifying structure program, having something that does, which is academic based and references all other works and governing bodies and directs people to them, is a great sort of resource to enable what you see in these images. That's why, if you are involved in the design development of e-learning, this should be your goal. It's the end results. If you're starting it the other way around in the what, the content's not going to be as engaging. A room full of academics, this is like teaching your grandma to suck eggs. You will know this. This is how we do it. We assess, we diagnose, design and deliver. Apologies for just doing the most boring PowerPoints and repeating what's on the screen, but I'll skip past this bit and obviously evaluation. This is the point here. We always start with the end result in mind. So what is it we want to achieve with this paracoach? And we did want to make sure that there was almost like a roadmap for potential paracoaches. And do it in an engaging way. So the content, I keep mentioning this over and over again, it caters for the collective mix of styles, learning styles. We've had requests previously from clients who say, we really love this whiteboard animation elements, do the entire course. Now you don't do the entire course, and that it may have got the best feedback from your participants, but we have to, you're only as strong as your weakest link. So you have to make sure there is something in there for somebody who maybe doesn't have the response to some of the more creative elements. Start with the end, and then this is more about the structure of how we approach. It's not, there is technical procedures in developing the e-learning. There is creative procedures, but it's more the strategic approach. It's got to start from the strategy. And this is what we did collaboratively with the team at Approach. Found out how it's going to be used. And this is the reason for some of the questions that we've asked you today. It is continuous improvement, so it'll be a program that will require continuous feedback. Somebody mentioned the FIFA course, and it's there, and how are they going to do this? You know, things change, but all course content should be continually updated and changed, not just from a cost perspective, but from a delivery perspective. Again, just simple structures of what we do, and then the diagnosing, the collaboration. Learning investments, we talked about potential for the programme to grow. It is test and monitor. We look at the results, we look how many people engage with it, what the engagement is, and that should hopefully give us a foundation stone for further development of it. You guys will know all of this in terms of academic teaching. Again, this relates to some of the questions we've asked, and we'll ask as we go progressing this. What are the challenges internally with your own departments and divisions? and how can the e-learning assistant help? What are the goals and clear expectations of the outcomes? The design, people talk about the design of it as if it's a creative process. And whilst the colour palettes and the creativity and animations are all part and parcel of it, design can be subjective if it's just design, but if you implement the strategy beforehand and you've got objectives, it's no longer subjective, it becomes objective, and that's what we've hopefully incorporated into this e-learning platform. Every organisation is different, and every participant is on their own, so we've hopefully covered in the content something that is relevant to paracoaches at varying levels and varying degrees, and signpost them to other areas that they can visit. And this is all about the delivery. There is people talk about the questions. It's not just about right and wrong answers. We said it's important that they understand. So some of the knowledge assessment, and I think this was delivered from the perspective of some of the best movies you watch or the best books that you read are things that tell you what you agree with and that you already know, but maybe do it in a more eloquent or creative way. We have used the examples of other paracoaches and what motivated them to get involved and what was their challenges, so people can read. It's not exactly classroom environment where you're talking to somebody, but at least you can sit, you can read and experience and interact and highlight your own, so that we can assess feedback of how the people are getting involved, and also direct them to the support tools they need going forward. So that's the summary of what we said before in terms of the evaluation. Knowing who's undertaken the course and who's done it with a full understanding and who's just speed push the button. You can't speed push a button through this programme. Yeah, but nor do you have to go all the way back to the beginning. There's been some instructional design taken into the individual content. So we hopefully work with the vision. Yeah, and I've talked about it for long enough. Probably, this is just a show reel, if you like, of some of the things. So we've got nice, we've used a standard paracoach colour palette, and there's nice graphics in there, but we've tried to duplicate, there's no audio to this, so don't think you're not listening. We've tried to duplicate a classroom environment with, if you like, a tutor. So Dr. Tabo Huntley, there's a long period, there are the longer elements of the training will be him explaining person to person, so they will feel that human connection. And then there is the digital elements of it, where somebody can approach this course in the segments that are relevant to them. So we've humanised it using a combination of video content and also graphic design. And I think the questions on this are a more subjective opinion rather than I know this. But it's the objective is more thought-provoking than do I know the answer. If you get people at the end of the course who think about it differently, think about it more positively, think about it enthusiastically, and from an informed perspective, and probably most importantly, did they enjoy doing it, then they're more likely to proceed to the next steps of their paracoach journey, and possibly tell other people about it. So it's, yeah, you're just seeing some elements of how it will be delivered. This is one element of 9 chapters developed, and this is specifically just this is a video screenshot of one of the elements. And people just submit their answer. So there's no right or wrong answer, but the metrics we will be able to, from the metrics, gain a pattern of why people are getting involved in this, and that can enable us to create the follow-up content. And then over to Amy.
Thank you. Yeah. So speaking about the content, this is our chapter list for the course. So apart from the group before you, this is the first time we've sort of put this out there. So just going to give you a brief snapshot of what the chapters are. So obviously chapter 1 is an introduction to the course, so it gives you an overview of what we're going to cover. We also have some history of the Paralympic Games in there and also the Paralympic movement. Chapter 2 is about becoming a reflexive coach, which also includes some information about coach learning and effective coaching. Coach 3 is knowing disability, so that's understanding disability and the different models that are used within society to understand this. It also covers some of the barriers faced by disabled people to participation in sport, and it also covers social norms that we experience in society and in our culture today. And chapter 4 is about inclusion and empowerment, so it's the difference between those two phrases and the importance of understanding and how we can use them within our practice as coaches. And chapter 5 is how we create inclusive and empowering environments, and how we can do this through the physical environment, the programme environment, and also the social environment. Chapter 6 is about impairment effects, which I touched on earlier. A lot of the coaches who took part in the workforce audit were very keen to have more information about this. So obviously we can't give information about every single impairment, but as many as we can, and we've signposted to other organisations to get more information. But also included in there is some things that coaches can do to adapt their practice in order to suit individuals as well. And then we have chapter 7, which is different methods of coaching, and it's got a little bit of learning theory in there. And then we've got chapter 8, which is inclusive practice. So we look at different models that we can use as coaches to adapt our practice. So we look at the STEP model and the A model, which I'm sure some of you are quite familiar with. And then we finish off on chapter 9 with the course review. So I know that's a very quick snapshot of what we've got covered. But just based off this list, if we go into the next activity, we've only sort of got 10 minutes left anyway. If you can just discuss in your groups, write down on your sheets what chapter out of those that I've just put up on the screen and that I've just described are you most looking forward to? So what do you think maybe will find most interesting? What do you think might be most useful to you as a coach or a practitioner? So if you want to have a little discussion in your groups, I'm going to walk around again.
Can I just add one thing before you enter into your discussions? Apologies, I'm full of cold today, so brain's operating a bit slow. Somebody did mention about the lack of interactivity that you would get in a classroom environment that you don't get in an e-learning. There is the potential, and this probably relates to the course overview and anything that you would like to see, Anne, there is the potential to have a forum on there. So anybody undergoing the course and is struggling with any particular area and wants to ask a question, they can engage with other people also doing the course and share their experiences. So just wanted to add that as a final point to the e-learning. Thank you.
Okay, if you want to start your discussions there again for me. We will feedback. Sorry, I know you're into conversation. We'll feedback on both of those. So we'll just go around to a few tables. We won't go to everything.
Amy, can we get some lights on just for a minute? My head is killing me.
Of course.
Please.
So we'll just go around to a few tables. If you just want to describe to us what chapters you're looking forward to and why, and then also if you think there's anything missing. So I'm going to start with that table at the back.
Oh gosh, okay, so I wrote some things down. What were your numbers?
So I went with 2, 3, 4 and 5 depending on what's in them.
Yeah.
Because potentially 5 actually could be more powerful than 4, depending on what the actual context. Because this is the thing, we don't know what sits behind some of those.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't even know what reflective officially meant in your vernacular, so we had to have a little bit of that.
Okay.
And then 8 as well, but the bits that again, these could sit behind some of it, is creativity. So how are we encouraging the coach to build creativity into their session, which potentially can help with some of the inclusivity aspect of it. You know, a primary school teacher, brilliant at creativity, because they've got to think. Their tool is their mind. It's not a massive curriculum.
Yeah.
They've got to be creative, so how are we do that? And also dealing with change, which could be one day you've got 5 people there, the next day you've got 1, then you've got 54. How do you cope with that? Or you've got one participant who wants everything and is really engaging, and one who is really timid and shy and shown you're not sure. How do you cope with change constantly of your person and dealing with a human being through to changing what you're teaching?
My understanding, and I have a team of people who've worked on this, my understanding is that this is to empower the individual to work these things out themselves rather than detailing specific details of anecdotal scenarios. It's given them more the concept, the general concept of what's the word? Like person-centered. So it's more that higher level, overarching sort of academic concept, and also signposting them to support tools. So rather than having something encyclopedic, which becomes too enormous to comprehend, it's a nice unifying piece of work that covers all the basics, but it's really, the main objective is to get people into thinking differently and how to react to the situations if Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Because there's a question as well, like, which part of this is how to be a compassionate human being?
Yeah.
You know, and I mean, it could be in a lot of things. And like, why have you got in coaching practice inclusive practice when this entire course is inclusive practice?
Mhm.
Like, what does that give me that's different to the whole of that course in that respect?
I think what we've done is ask a almost impossible question. We've given you subject titles without any real knowledge of what's contained within it. The reason behind it is just in case there was one specific area that became a common request, so that we could just give it a final rethink. The plans are that we're in the final stages now. A test site is active, and I know Amy and Tabo will probably send out links to the test site to relevant stakeholders to get their informed feedback. We can do so much, Amy and Tabo can do so much, but it's the people on the ground I think we need there. So that's in the plans before the actual live launch of it. Hope that answers your question.
Yeah.
I do like the fact that chapter 2 is where chapter 2 is. I mean, almost if you just said chapter 1 wasn't actually a chapter, it's just the introduction. So the first thing we're asking people to do is actually really think about why they do what they do, what their motivations are, what they're trying to get from this, and equally, what the people that they're going to be supporting, coaching, what they can get from it. So I like that.
Thank you. I'd like to say it was my idea, but it wasn't.
Great, thank you. And we'll go to this table and then we will finish off after the feedback.
Our main things we liked was 3 and 6, so knowing disability and impairment effect. We think that the main thing across all of this is understanding the disabilities and what the effect of that is on the person or the people around them. But the one thing that's come up across this whole day is communication with that individual, and how to communicate with that individual. You can understand disability, so an amputee is an amputee, they're missing half a leg, missing an arm, cool. But how do you actually communicate with that person? And everybody is different, every disability is different. One person might want you to talk to them about it, someone might not. So it's how to approach it. And whether that's in there, like you said, we don't know what's in it. How do you approach a disability? How do you discuss it? Do they want to discuss? But it's down to relationship and communication.
And we're not offering cognitive solutions, it's more cares and senses. Guidance, I think, is the general tone of it.
Can I just add something? John's just made me think. You've separated knowing disability and impairment effects, and those were the 2 chapters that we were talking more about. Why is impairment effect not coming straight after knowing disability? To me, you're talking about the disability, knowing disability, then you talk about the effects that different impairments have, then you go on how you create that inclusive environment. It seems to be in the wrong place.
I wonder about that.
Can you make a note of that on your sheet, because we will be collecting all the sheets of feedback, because I won't remember everybody's feedback at all, so it's nice to have it written down.
Very valid point there, yeah. Thank you. So just before you go, I've got one more question that I just want you to think about. We're not going to go through it today, I just want you to think about how you think, obviously you've not got the full detail of what's in the course, but you've got a sort of snapshot overview, how you think it might complement the current provision within your context or within your coaching practice. So we just want to thank quite a few people that have helped us develop the course. Thank you for listening to us.